Anyways, well, guys, listen, we're going to have some fun, and we're going to hit on a different component of the Constitution. But before we do that, you guys know I always like to, given that we've got new people that are joining us, I want them to really understand the foundation upon which we're working, right? That we're not just jumping into a topic and not having a common foundation through which we can analyze the topic. And by the way, we're going to be talking a little bit about the amendment process. We're going to get down and dirty on that process. I believe it's one of the solutions that we should analyze and look at. That'll make more sense when we get there. But I want you to think about, while I'm talking about some of the foundational principles of our country and of the Constitution, I want you to think about either an amendment that you're like, hey, we need to get rid of that, or something that you would like to see implemented by way of the amendment process that could really start to derail the runaway big government train and get the freedom train back on track where it belongs. So I want you to think about that. We'll dive deep. This is going to be, I think, really educational as we engage with one another. But kind of stepping back here for a quick moment, right? We every week we're talking about what are some of the solutions. And of course, I'm a big believer, as I believe all of you are, that the Constitution is not the problem, it's the answer. And the fight really in America at this time is for an interpretation of the Constitution. That's really what we're fighting over, is the interpretation of what the Constitution actually means. That's why we get on and we fight and we engage, not just on here, but just society in general. Typically, that's what we're arguing about is, is the Constitution outdated? And if it's not outdated, what does it really mean? Is it more of a static document versus a living, breathing document, right? We're constantly engaging over those things. But at its very core, the purpose of the Constitution is to limit government. And as you limit government, freedom is to be maximized, right? The Constitution is a document, as I say quite often, it's a complex maze of booby traps designed to stop tyranny and maximize freedom. Well, how is it to act as a trap? Well, we know that the Constitution specifies and enumerates the power of the federal government, right? We don't say that the Constitution is a document of unlimited powers. If it was a document of unlimited powers, there would be no need for the Constitution. We have a Constitution because it limits power. It tells the government specifically what it's authorized to do. And when it steps outside of those bounds, that's when we've got some concerns. And so I talk often about the Constitution being a complex maze of booby traps designed to stop tyranny. And we all know that tyranny exists, which begs the question, why is the Constitution not doing its job? Well, it's not that the Constitution is not doing its job. It's that the traps aren't being engaged by the people. That is, we're not enforcing the document. We're not holding the bar high enough. We're not making this a topic of conversation. We're not ensuring that individuals that are operating at all levels of government are actually honoring their oath. Remember, politics is downstream from culture. What we see in politics is a direct reflection of what's going on culturally. When you have a culture that doesn't understand freedom, when they don't understand limited government, when they don't understand the Constitution, they tend to elect individuals into office that are a direct reflection of those values. So if we became a culture that really grew in this love for freedom and grew in this love for limited government, what would we tend to be sending into office? Individuals that reflected those values. And so I always want to make that clear, because I think it's so often it's easy to get on and talk about DC's the problem, and right, our local school board's the problem, and what's going on at the state level's the problem, which I believe is a symptom of the problem, right? The real problem is the people. If you buy into this idea of self-governance, and you buy into this idea that we elect individuals that are supposed to act in our stead, then you also have to, the responsibility, you got to take responsibility for what we've created. So we've allowed big government to evolve. We've allowed freedom to slide, at least collectively as a culture. And so this is a massive effort going on throughout the country as we see people coming together that really want to take their government back, that really want to restore the principles of freedom, that want to restore the republic. And I know there can be an element of frustration when we get on here and talk. Because one of the most common things I hear as I travel and speak is enough talking and let's start doing. There's some truth to that, but the problem is so many of the people that want to do don't know. Does that make sense? so many of the people that want to do don't know. And I think that's a big part of the problem, is that we have a bunch of people that want to engage, but they don't know what they're fighting for, right? They don't know what they're trying to restore. They don't know what a constitutional republic is supposed to look like. They don't know how to legitimately and adequately hold individuals in office accountable. So because they don't understand the operation of a constitutional republic, we're kind of spinning our wheels. And so we all have something that we feel called to do, right? We're the hands and feet of freedom. And so I get on here and I make it very clear. I know what I'm called to do. And what my calling is education. It's to inspire. It's to mobilize. Now, each one of you may feel a different calling, and I don't know what that is, but I bet some of you maybe feel inclined to run for office. Others of you feel inclined to be aggressively in support of a candidate, right? To be a wingman, if you will, or to be down in the trenches with that candidate. Others might feel as though you've been called to be an organizer, maybe of rallies and bringing people together. Others might feel called to act as a committeeman, a precinct committeeman, maybe entrenched in party politics in some way, shape, or form. Others might feel called to be educators. But my point in saying that is this: we're not all called to do the same thing, right? We all feel something different about where we need to be involved. And I think that's important, because I've been in gatherings with thousands of people, and I'll see someone take the microphone and say, you know what needs to happen? You all need to be precinct committeemen. And I'm like, no, they don't. Not everybody needs to be a precinct committeeman. If they feel called to do that, then yes, right? Or, man, you all need to think about running for office. No, you don't. Not everybody's called to do that. So some of you may know what you feel called to do. And I think the beauty of these conversations that we have once a week is it's those people that don't know what they're called to do. It's kind of inspiring people to step up. It's inspiring. Okay, man, you know what? I think I do really good, kind of, doing these sorts of things. So that's really the hope, is not just education, but figuring out in this process what you feel called to do. And as I mentioned last week, we got a little bit, I don't want to say sidetracked, because as long as we're talking about freedom, there's no such thing as it being sidetracked. But, there oftentimes within the freedom movement, there's talk of revolution. And I believe that restoration can happen short of a violent revolution. And I've kind of hinted at some of my thoughts on that. But let's assume that we are talking about revolution. And I don't want to, let me just be very clear on my thought on talking about revolution. I don't believe that anybody in their right mind who's serious about restoring a country would ever talk about revolution in an open environment. Like the United States military wouldn't get on national TV and say, hey, we're doing this, and there's our strategies and stuff like that. Like talking revolution is more than a soundbite and cliche for me. Like this serious stuff when you start talking about that. And too many people use it as cliche. And they want to get on the radio and they want to write on Facebook and we're doing revolution. Like I venture to say most of them have no idea what they're talking about, and they don't understand the gravity of the situation. When you start calling on that, people die, right? And people will die. And it will not just be a few people that die. And so that aside, that's not something I'm going to talk about here. But I will say this: if you're talking about overhauling government, do we know what we're looking to replace it with? And this is my point. Like, this is the big point right here, is do we know what we're looking at? Do we know what the ideal looks like? Because we can talk about these sorts of things all we want, but unless we know what the ideal looks like, it really doesn't matter, right? Let's see, I think we've got, can you mute everybody there, Kathy? We're getting a few, little bit of feedback here.
I'm trying to do that, right? There we go. Okay, try that now, Shane.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. So anyways, that's what we're talking about here, is learning the principles for effective implementation. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about the amendment process. There is a movement going on right now in the United States, and it's pretty widespread. And the movement is talking about calling a convention to amend the Constitution. Can we have everybody mute? We're getting a little bit of background noise here.
Okay, I'm going to mute
Why don't
everyone
you just,
and
I think
then,
you can click on mute all. Kathy, I
yeah,
think you
and
should
then
have
you'll have
the,
to
yeah, I'll unmute, no problem. Just do mute all and then make me a co-host so I can unmute myself.
okay,
Did you?
here we go, sorry.
No, nobody's unmute. Nobody's still, everybody's.
Okay,
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. So guys, that's really what we're talking about. And I want to be very clear. We're always talking about the ideal. We can talk all day about the problem, and here's where we're at. We're talking about what does the ideal look like. It's very much like the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence wasn't a State of the Union of 1776. It was, here's the ideal, here's the target, here's the benchmark that we want to strive for, right? And so we're very much, that's what we're doing here, is talking about how do we get things back to where it is that we want to go. And so anyways, back to what I was mentioning, there's a movement going on right now that is focused on calling a convention. They call it Article 5 convention, which is different than a constitutional convention. I want to be clear. Sometimes these terms are thrown out. A constitutional convention is a convention designed to absolutely overhaul the Constitution itself. Whereas an Article 5 convention is a convention specifically designed to amend the Constitution, to address a specific issue within the Constitution. Now, here's what's interesting. With regard to the Article 5, if you guys have your Constitution, you can crack open to Article 5. Article 5 is very specific as to the amendment process. It outlines how it's been done. Now, by the way, how many amendments do we have? How many we got?
27.
What'd you say, Kathy?
I said 27, but
27. That's exactly right. So we have 27 amendments. And does anybody know the process that those amendments went through in order to become ratified and a part of our Constitution? Did they go through, were they conventions that were initiated by the states, or were they conventions that were initiated, or was it the amendment process that was initiated by Congress? Which one?
I think it has to be initiated by the states.
Okay, well, under Article 5, there are two ways. Actually, there's 4 ways, but there's 2 primary ways to amend the Constitution. One way is that you've got 2/3 of the House and the Senate, and there's an amendment that's proposed, and then it goes down to either the state legislatures or state ratifying conventions. So that's one way. The other way is that you have essentially state legislatures buying into this. And so long as you have 2/3 of the state legislatures authorizing a convention, it's going to happen. So all 27 amendments happen through the congressional route, all 27. There's not one, there's not ever been an amendment that began with the process that was initiated through the state legislature, not one. So that's why this is unique. We're experiencing a very unique time in history. And we're again, the proposal is we're going through the state legislature. And by the way, as I'm talking about this, I'm wondering if we had talked about this maybe several months ago. I know it at one of our town halls we did, but I don't remember if we did it here. But hey, even if we did, we're going to dive into even more detail than maybe we did in the past. So with that said, let me just ask you about a gut feeling. I want to open this up. Is it a good idea? Is it something that we would want to encourage here, to have the states move forward and convene for purposes of analyzing whether an amendment is appropriate? Now, that is I want to be very clear. That's a different question than what would the amendment look like, or what specific things would be discussed. So first things first, is it a good idea for the states to move forward and talk about convening a convention to amend the Constitution? What do you guys think on that? What's your gut feeling? And as you tell me your gut feeling, tell us why. A yay or a nay, and then why.
My gut feeling is no. But I mean,
And why?
all right. Well, why? Because I just feel like there's a lot of tyranny already in state governments, in my opinion, of course. And I live in New York, so whatever that's worth. But I do think back though, isn't that kind of how the federal constitution was started though? Was it like the representatives from all the states wrote it, right? So in a way, I feel like that's logically against why they made the Constitution, because the states were to get together and say, federal government, here's the rules that we give you. But you know, that's my gut feeling. I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay, so Brandon, let me ask you this question. If it's not a good idea, what is an alternative solution? If we want to rein in by the way, I'm not playing advocate. I'm playing devil's advocate, not just trying to advocate for one side or the other, just asking a question here. What is the alternative? If we want to rein in big government and we're not willing to take the risk of a state initiated convention, what's the solution?
Yeah, I like what Charles Ross just put in the chat. Enforce what exists.
Okay, so let me open this up to Charles and to you, Brandon. So enforcing what exists, okay? The Commerce Clause of the Constitution currently allows the federal government to pass virtually any law that they wish. I'll give you an example. Under President Clinton, the Solicitor General. So the Solicitor General is the one who represents the government at all Supreme Court proceedings. So anytime the government is involved and the government's taking a position, Solicitor General is the one who advocates in front of the US Supreme Court. So under President Clinton, the Solicitor General was asked by one of the justices, can you give an example of one law based on our current interpretation of the Commerce Clause that would not pass, that would not survive constitutional muster given our interpretation? And the Solicitor General sat there in an awkward silence and said, off of the top of my head, I cannot think of one law that would not pass based on the Supreme Court's current interpretation of the Commerce Clause. So my point, I think Charles brings up a great point when we talk about enforcement of the Constitution, generally speaking. But I believe the Commerce Clause is something that has allowed the government to grow so large. Remember, we talked about this, I don't know, a month ago, and I just had mentioned, hey, just take a quick stroll through your house and virtually everything in your home is regulated to some degree by the federal government. So your washer, your dryer, your microwave oven, your refrigerator, your freezer, your dishwasher, your toilet. Like if your toilet is flushing more than 1.6 gallons of water per flush, you're in violation of federal regulations. True story. Like what business does the federal government have regulating toilets? But they do. How so? Commerce Clause. Baby rattles, dog toys, cradles, right? Cribs. All of these things are being regulated under the Commerce Clause. And so I like this idea, and that's just one example. The Commerce Clause has been adulterated till the cows come home on that one. So what about that idea, Brandon, or anybody for that matter? Is it a good idea? How do we fix this idea when the federal government right now has a permission slip to pass any law that they want virtually? Now, we've got a great Supreme Court in place that I believe will stop this with some upcoming cases that will start to restrain it, right? Start to limit it. Lee, what were you going to say?
So I think that the way that things were originally set up, where the states picked the senators, is that correct? The states were originally set up to pick the senators, and they weren't elected by the people. So the states actually had representation in Congress. And with that being the case, I think that it makes sense that the laws originate, or that the amendment process started in Congress and worked down to the states. As it is right now, I think it makes more sense that the amendment process starts at the states and works up to Congress, because we don't have that representation of the states in the Senate.
Lee, 2 points. I really appreciate that. 2 points here. I want to come back to you with a question here. Point number one is I would just want to make sure everybody's clear on this, that when the Constitution was originally ratified in 1788, it was the people that voted in the members of the House of Representatives, and the state legislators appointed 2 individuals that were to be senators. And the idea was this: the people would be the people's interest would be represented through the House of Representatives, and then you'd have state interest that would be represented through the Senate. Man, genius, absolutely genius. And then, of course, the 17th Amendment comes along, and the people are sold a bill of goods. And the bill of goods is this: why should the state legislators take your voice? Like, you should be the voice for who your senators are. And they were sold that bill of goods, and ultimately the 17th Amendment's ratified. And now today we vote in both members of the House and members of the Senate. So Lee's saying, wait a second, hey, let's get back to that. So my second point is this, Lee, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Number one, are you opposed right now to a state-initiated convention? That's number one. And number two, if you're not opposed, would you like to see the 17th Amendment addressed at that convention?
I am not opposed, and I would like to see it addressed, because I think that the way that it was originally written, to me, makes more sense. I think that it's more balanced in terms of the distribution of power and the checks and balances that were originally incorporated into the Constitution. So yeah, I think that it makes perfect sense to address that.
So I like and by the way, if there were going to be a convention, I've got maybe some ideas I'll share here in a little bit on some of my thoughts that I'd like to see addressed. Certainly the 17th Amendment is one of them. Of course, that's going to be a tough sell. I think anything, when we talk about, remember, it's not just going to be a bunch of liberty-loving folks that show up at this convention, right? You're going to have individuals from all walks, right? Because you're going to have you're going to have at least 34 states sending in delegates, and we're not talking all conservative states, right? So you're going to have people on the other side. So that's battle number one, is just getting individuals there from the 34 states. And even if there is an agreement on an amendment, you still have to have 38 states that jump on for ratification. So I think the 17th Amendment, although it's one that I like and that needs to be addressed, can you imagine the states going back and pleading for ratification, and you got people who, man, their elections on the line, and saying, hey, we're going to take your voice away from you and we're going to give it back to us, the state legislature. Can you imagine the sell? It's going to be a tough sell, even though it's the right thing to do. We've got this battle going on right now in America, democracy versus republic. Like, guys, I'm all over this debate, and you wouldn't believe the kind of flack that I get for arguing we're a constitutional republic. In fact, just over the last week, the flack that I've gotten is, it sounds like you're calling for a dictatorship. You're opposed to democracy. You're calling for a dictatorship. I'm like, what are you talking about? I call for a dictatorship. I'm calling for exactly the opposite, right? It's actually democracies, pure democracies, almost always evolve into dictatorships. I'm calling for something different. Well, why do you want to take away the voice from the people? We're not talking about taking away the voice from the people. So there's this massive misconception on democracy versus republic. And of course, we've talked about that a lot right here, right? Does a constitutional republic embrace democratic components? Of course, we vote in individuals are supposed to act in our stead. But the part that a democracy doesn't embrace that a republic does is that we protect the rights of all, regardless of whether they fit in the majority group. That is not democracy. That's where a republic becomes unique. We embrace those two components. So that's going to be an interesting sell. But do I agree that that's something should be addressed? Yes. Joe, take it away.
Just a quick comment. It seems that history proves that the tendency in mankind is that we always look for a higher power to solve our problems as opposed to solving them ourselves. And as a result of that, we seem to gravitate to a more centralized authority. And it seems like authority wants to be centralized. And so that's the tendency. And if you look over the last 200 plus years, we've done exactly that: centralization, and more centralization. And so what you're talking about here, if you're trying to take it back to the states in any way, shape, or form, even taking it back to the legislature of the states, you're crying for more decentralization. And that is at a point, I don't think that, I think reality and based in what you just said, trying to convince people that we want to take it back to the way it was before. I don't know if the power is there. I don't know if the power in the people, the power in the mentality, the integrity in the mentality is there to effectively bring to pass the decentralization that we really need to have.
So
Once you
Joe, let me
centralize-
ask you, do you stand in opposition to a state initiated convention, Article 5 convention?
An Article 5 convention, I am, because I don't trust people. I do not trust I trust what has been written down before. And it seems to me that almost everything that's come after that has been, I personally believe that the Constitution was a high watermark, and everything since then has been a step away from a decentralized republic. And as a result, I don't think the mentality today, you look at the indoctrination that we've been under for the last 100 years in our educational system, which has been pure socialism. If you look at the indoctrination, people want centralized authority. The larger the population, the more government they want. And as a result, I think trying to go backwards on that, trying to go back to decentralization is what we really need. At the same time, what's the best way to accomplish that? I personally don't believe that you can accomplish it through a democratic process. I think it has
Okay,
to be.
Joe, thank you so much. I want to come back. I want to ask you a question here. First of all, I really appreciate your first point. And your first point is you don't like the state initiated convention. You bring up a valid argument here. And Lee, I'd love to hear your perspective, or anybody else who kind of your gut says state initiated convention is a good thing. What I hear Joe saying is, okay, so we're going to initiate a convention, and who's going to go there as delegates? Who are the state legislatures going to choose as delegates? When we have a population right now that are so uneducated and misinformed on the principles of freedom, on the original intent of the Constitution. So who are we going to send there? Like, I'm in Arizona. Guys, I can think of a handful of people, maybe a handful of people that really get it. I mean, really get it. Like they understand the ins and outs of the Constitution. They understand original intent and what the ideal ultimately looks like, and how to best get it there, and how to use the Constitution as a sword and a shield. And so what Joe's saying is really valid in terms of, okay, so we do it, but who we sending? Who the state's going to send? Because I look in Arizona, and I look at our state legislature, man, it's pretty middle of the road. Pretty middle of the road. Like, we don't have any, all you guys know, I love Ron Paul. We don't have anybody remotely close to a Ron Paul philosophy.
Bingo.
And
Bingo.
problematic. So Joe, I'm sorry, Brandon, to say that.
Regarding the Article 5 convention, and there's a principle that I base this on. If you have a law that's based on natural law, if you have a law that's based on sound principles, then that law should stand. And if you don't enforce the law, is it the law's fault, or is it enforcement? And we have not enforced the law upon government. And I'm not talking about enforcing the law on people. I'm talking about enforcing the law on government. We have not done that in over 160 years. And we've reached a point where we're completely centralized, and trying to go back into decentralized, which I think is absolutely critical. Are you going to be able to accomplish that by addressing the law? The law is sound. You don't go back and change the law because you can't control a criminal. If you can't control a criminal.
Joe, let me ask you this. Going back to the Commerce Clause, I know you would agree with me that the current interpretation of the Commerce Clause, which really, man, if you had to pinpoint the heartbeat of runaway government, Commerce Clause has to be right dead center, right? Because virtually any law, if they can't justify it into any law, if they're going to justify it all, if they can't justify it anywhere else, this is just a Commerce Clause issue. And as a result of that, we've got government regulating virtually everything. Do you agree that if we did have the right people and we did initiate an Article 5 convention, would Commerce Clause be something that you would want to refine and clarify.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I would want to go back and you know, the thing is they used plain English to them in the day that they did it, but the word regulate in those days means something completely different than it does today than it did then. Regulate then means to support. Regulate then means to support the organization of such things. And today, regulate means to control. And that was just virtually the opposite back then.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Joe. I mean, when you look at the Commerce Clause today, but basically the baseline is, can this thing, can this product, can this person cross state lines? Yes. Okay, that's commerce. That's really the interpretation at this point. Can it cross state lines? Therefore, it's commerce. Oh, the dog toy can pass state lines. Oh, we can regulate that.
Right.
It's crazy.
And in reality, the Commerce Clause was there so that the government would not infringe upon free trade and free market economy, free market principles. And that's what it was there for. It wasn't to regulate, it was to support, it was to promote. And basically, the only way you can promote something economically in government is keep your dang hands off.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Shane, just because I have a line of thought here, but when you mentioned, they say that regulate means we can do whatever we want. That's a Supreme Court thing? The Supreme Court says government can do that? So, yeah, this is my thought. Sitting here thinking about this. What's the point of a convention of states if, regardless of what they come out with, saying, oh, we're going to ratify the whole Constitution or erase the whole thing, yada, yada, when it just sounds like Supreme Court makes the ultimate decision. We can say, again, we can put, oh, you never ever should ever do this, yada, yada. Again, government can never touch, commerce between the states, no matter what they do, no matter what anyone says. And then the Supreme Court will still say, well, we interpret that to mean the government can do that a little bit still, right?
I understand. I think going back to Joe's point on the Commerce Clause, the way that it's written, it says regulate commerce. And the court is really taken that word regulation to mean something much, much different than the original intent. And my point is, if you did go back in and you made it very clear as to what the Commerce Clause actually means, like really got into a little bit of detail, right? Because like let's not go down this path of saying the Supreme Court doesn't analyze the text of these various provisions. They absolutely do. I mean, I'm thinking about the Second Amendment case.
I was about to say that myself.
But Second Amendment, they went through and they talked about the militia clause. They spent a lot of time talking about the militia clause and the right of the people to keep and bear arms. What does that mean? And of course, the current Supreme Court interpreted that to mean that the individual has a fundamental right to keep and bear arms. So all of these various clauses, it's not that they're skipping over them. There is an interpretation.
It's
and
a bad
it just so happens that the current interpretation has gone way far and away from the original intent. And so if there were going to be this state-initiated Article 5 convention, why not refine it? Why not specify exactly what it means in a sentence or two?
Because
that's my thought.
Well, my thought is right. If they don't understand what the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed, like, I don't think it's any clearer than that. I don't think rewriting that's going to fix anything. Frankly,
Right.
I want to give the finger to the Supreme Court. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you get that interpretation wrong?
Yeah, Brandon, in fact, I'd go with you on this one. Second Amendment has been one that's crossed my mind on if just kind of having fun with this. If there were a state-initiated convention and the Second Amendment were to be one that was going to be addressed, I would actually be for it. And you know what I would do? I would eliminate the militia clause.
Yeah, good idea.
All the Second Amendment would say,
Yep.
it would just say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Right.
I like it.
Because we know what the
with
original intent. We know what the original intent of the founders was. It was to be a purposive clause. It was here's the environment we want to foster, and for that reason, we're making it clear you cannot infringe. But I think if the founders were alive today, they'd be like, what's all this sorcery about? Like, what's this nonsense about? Like, no way. And then just make it very clear. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
I think the entire reason the militia clause is in there was when you use the word regulate, they meant to promote, they meant to foster, they meant to support, they meant to recognize a right to do these things. And the militia clause basically means that the people are the military, the people are the militia, the people are they are the source of the right to keep and bear arms. They are the source of all arms. If anybody has a right to arms, it's the individual. The government has no right to arms. The only way the government can get the right to arms is to get it from the individual. And so how can the government go back and try and quote unquote regulate in today's terminology or control or to authorize? They can't authorize. It's the individual that authorizes the government. And so when it comes to arms, when they say a well-regulated mission, they meant a well-fostered, well-promoted on a local basis, promoted by the local people, that the people have the right to organize. They have the right to basically stand up against their government and say no. And that is the militia.
And not only
No,
that,
I
they
always-
had just used that right
Sorry,
to
go ahead.
overcome England, the
Yes.
tyranny of England. They had just used that. They were very familiar with the people banding together to throw off tyranny.
That's exactly what it's targeted at.
Joe, I always love how you bring back the point. I get nearly every time, and I think it just bears repeating over and over. And that is, the government cannot have what the people don't possess in the first place.
Bingo.
Like, government can't assume. Number one, government doesn't have rights, and you've mentioned that before. Government doesn't have rights, right? It has privileges that we, the people, have granted, right, through this ruling document. So I love that you're constantly bringing that up. Lee Roberts, wanted to ask you your thoughts. Is this challenge your perspective maybe a little bit on who might we send? Because I know you're, or anybody else for that matter, a state-initiated convention, who might we send? What does that look like?
My initial inclination is that just because you can't find the right people doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do. And if you don't have the right people, it's not going to happen to begin with.
No.
I believe. I don't think it'll happen if the right people aren't on board with it.
So,
And
Lee, what I'm hearing you say, if I could just kind of amplify this, and I'd love to hear your guys' response. What I hear Lee saying, kind of the undertone here, is it's worth the risk. It's worth the risk. Because are we going to, so here's the hypothetical. We have a state-initiated Article 5 convention. The delegates from the various states show up, and it's a train wreck, right? So number one, I think what's really important to understand is we're not just sending them there to discuss the Constitution in general. Like, each of the legislatures in this process of endorsing this is going to have something specific that they're going to discuss. Hey, we're going to discuss Commerce Clause. Hey, we're going to discuss a balanced budget amendment. Hey, we're going to clarify Second Amendment. There's going to be something very specific that they're going to go there to address.
Shane.
Hold on,
Question.
Joe, let me just finish this thought.
Sure.
So they go there and it's absolute train wreck. And Lee's saying, let's take a chance on the train wreck because we do have a protection in place. And the protection is this: you still need 38 states to ratify, and you're not going to get 30 states to ratify on something that's profoundly anti-liberty. Just not going to happen. Not with the current makeup today. In other words, you're not going to have an overhaul of the Second Amendment to, let's assume you got 34 states, they come together, they send their delegates, they all show up, and out comes a proposal that in order to have the right to keep and bear arms, it has to be a state-run militia. Just play with me here for a minute. And you're like, holy cow, what just came out of this? Like, what kind of nonsense is this? You would never have that amendment pass 38, for ratification purposes, 38 legislatures. It would never happen. Lee, go ahead. And then Joe, come. I want Lee to respond, and then Joe, we're coming back to you.
Yeah. So the other thing that I would add is that the alternative right now is the status quo, and the status quo isn't working. So, I don't want to say what's the harm, because there can be harm in trying something different. But if what we're doing isn't working, we kind of need to try something different.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah. What I hear you saying, Lee, is if I just put some of my own words kind of dovetailing off what you say, the runaway convention is already happening in Washington, D.C. For us to do nothing, the runaway continues. Why not take a shot? Joe, what were you going to say?
I was going to say this. First of all, I want to start with a question. And the question is this: what did the delegates go to the original convention to discuss? They didn't go to discuss the Constitution. What did they go to discuss?
Articles of Confederation
Bingo. And they came away with
with the Constitution.
Constitution. So so you see where I'm going with this. If we could go to an Article 5 convention, I would be totally for if we could walk away independent. If we could walk away and say, we've got our own constitution, but we're going back, we're going to divide this thing up. I'm totally for decentralization.
So wait, Joe, let me understand this right. So number one, I don't entirely agree with your characterization of, hey, they went to discuss Articles of Confederation and the implication is they violated some rules and somehow came out with the Constitution. That's not quite accurate, but I do want to get to your bigger point.
I'm just
Joe,
saying
your bigger point.
They went to discuss one thing and they came away with another. That's all I'm saying. Is that I think we could go to discuss the Constitution and come away with something completely different. I want to keep the principles of the Constitution, keep the principles of the of natural law, but the ability to walk away and the ability to walk away peacefully and the ability to say, we opt out.
So Joe, you would be okay. I just want to make sure I understand this.
Sure,
you would be okay with the revamping of the current Constitution?
No, not really. I mean, I'm okay with revamping certain things. I mean, I'm totally at odds with everything that's happened after 1865. And so, because centralization, I think, was the absolute worst thing that could ever happen to the original colonies, to the original free and independent states. Trying to recognize a central authority as supreme is counterintuitive. And so to try and take it back to a decentralized republic is, in my mind, would be the goal. And I think everything we've discussed actually kind of sort of leads to that. When you talk about taking the principles in the 17th and returning the ability to appoint senators to the states and not to a popular vote, I think that is a decentralization measure in and of itself. When you break it down to a pure democracy, you've got problems. And I don't believe I don't believe in democratic rule because that's just mob rule.
Sure.
And I think you have to recognize the supremacy of the individual and that all rights and authorities come from that individual, and there are no other inherent or lawful authorities. And so if you could accomplish that, if you could go back to that principle that nothing can be preemptive or superintended in terms of the individual, great. But if you can't, we deserve we have the right to go our own way.
Well, Joe, and that brings it back to your initial point, which I absolutely respect, and that is, okay, who are we going to send? Like, hey, here's where we want to go, but do we have the people in place to make it happen? And I think, I'm a person that believes, and we've talked about this before, I believe that the Constitution was an inspired document. And I think the evidence, just objectively speaking, the evidence is overwhelming. Like, how do you come among a population of, a few 100,000 people, and you come up with caliber of individuals like a James Madison, a Thomas Jefferson, and a John Adams, even though a little bit bigger government guy. Alexander Hamilton. Like, how do you come across, it's just, the evidence is overwhelming. And so we want to try and recreate that. Man, that's a big roll of the dice. Don Dickinson, what were you going to say?
I wasn't prepared for your call. Hey, well, first of all, democracy, can we call democracy dictatorship by mob rule?
It can be. It can be. It not always is, but it certainly can be. Well, and Shane, this is something that you have not. Don, can I just explain real quick? Because that's such a good question. Because I think oftentimes we lose credibility by saying democracy is a dictatorship or democracy is a bad thing. In an ideal world, if we all lived on an island together, 100 liberty-loving folks living on an island together, democracy would likely be a good thing. Like, hey, we could, because we're all of the same mind. The problem is, where does it ultimately evolve to? Human beings are human beings. And what do we tend to devolve to? A dictatorship. Democracies almost always evolve into dictatorships. In fact, I don't know of one example where it didn't. But in an ideal world, could you think of a democracy being a good thing? Yeah, but it's never worked out that way, right? So anyways, I apologize for interrupting, Don. Go ahead. No, that's okay. No, you and I have talked about this before as business partners. If I hop on this no Article 5 bandwagon, am I not joining the Smarter Than the Founders Club?
I have to agree. I forget who said it earlier. Take the chance, even if it comes out with some really silly ideas. Like you said, it's unlikely that they're going to be ratified. I think it is worth the chance.
Donna, I can appreciate that point, and I think that's something that we hear quite often is, well, no, we can't do this. Well, wait a second. The Article 5 process was put in there in the Constitution for what purpose? To hit back against an overbearing, overreaching, corrupt government. It was put there as a tool. So
as well as the amendment process.
Right. So are we only going to use the amendment process when things are going well? Oh, wait a second. When things are going well, I don't need it. So I can't use it when things are going bad. Why? Well, because there's too much corruption and there's not enough people to get us back on track. Like it really is a quandary. Like by the way, I am for the idea, but I recognize all of the pitfalls, the risk, the very thing that Joe brought up of not being, man, are we going to have the people? Like, I get that all. But it's a tool, and it's a tool to be used. And I get
well, like I said, I'm just afraid. I mean, if I would think that a majority of people on this meeting tonight feel that it is well, look at the title of the meeting, the topic, our divine constitution. If it's divinely inspired, then these people that put this together, the Constitution, even the Articles of Confederation before the Constitution, these were smart people. They knew what they were doing. And for people to say, nope, no Article 5 ever, but you're running completely afield of what the founders intended. Why else would they put it in there if they didn't want it to be an option, at least?
Don, let me ask you a question, though. And I'm coming at you from the other side here with some of the claims that have been brought. And what about that idea that, wait a second, okay, I get it. We want to derail the big government runaway train, and we want to start to, as we rein that back, try and open up the gates of freedom once again. How do we deal with this idea that likely, well, I'm not going to say likely, it's almost an absolute certainty that the majority of individuals that show up at a state-initiated convention are not thinking like we're thinking here. They're not having these conversations. They don't understand these principles. They're going to show up with their own ideas and concepts. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think it starts just like this: education. And it's not going to, I think we're looking at it from a perspective of the microwave mentality. Let's do it and get it done. It's going to take a couple of generations, I have a feeling. It's not going, there's not the antibiotic solution. It's not going to be fixed in a couple of weeks. It's going to take years, if not, like I said, generations.
So, okay. But again, remember, Don, that when we're talking about a state-initiated convention, right now there's an organization called Convention of States. If anybody's interested in researching it, Convention of States is an organization, and there's 19 states that have jumped on board. They need 34. So they've got a little bit more than half. And this could happen sometime in the next 12 to 24 months. And at that point, a convention is going to happen. And here's something else to consider. By the way, guys, I have an engagement in 3 minutes, another engagement I got to hop on. So it's nonstop. What was I going to say? It was right along this point that is so powerful.
They're getting close.
This could,
12 to 24 months.
The convention could happen.
Yes.
The convention could happen sooner than a couple of generations from now. So education is paramount. We've got to educate ourselves. Firstly, I mean, look at what you and Joe, you're the guys, in my opinion. But we've got to do our own education. We can't. You're not going to be there every day. Someday you're going to be gone. Then what? We need to be educating ourselves and our children and grandchildren, et cetera, our friends, neighbors, relatives, so that when this does pop up, oh yeah, I remember hearing about this. But it's all about education. I've learned this from you over the past many years.
Yeah. Thank you, Don. Appreciate it. Guys, let's do this. there's two issues I want to hit on in the next couple of weeks. And I love the discussion we had last week, and we were going to continue on. There's just, I get messages and people are like, man, I'd love to hit on this. I'd love to hit on that. And then I kind of having my finger on the heartbeat of what's going on and what people are talking about. But I do want to continue on with this conversation. And I also want to continue on with the conversation we had last week. We actually had a town hall that night and actually ended up talking about that. And it was, people throwing things, right, figuratively. It was a lot of excitement around this idea of, right, what does a republic look like? And, a lot of people were kind of hitting the nose a little bit by, wait a second, I do support that idea. And I actually do see that idea is not consistent with the constitutional republic. It was a lot of fun. But listen, I want to hit on those two issues in the coming weeks. And if you have thoughts on any issues you'd like to discuss as well, we're just going to continue to blaze through some of these things. And, send a message to Kathy and let her know, hey, man, we'd like to see some of this discussed, and we'll make it happen. But I do have to jump off on a call that's starting in 1 minute. They're waiting for me. But guys, have hope. Man, listen, I'm going to say this again. I've said it many, many times. The liberty movement is just as much a leadership movement as it is a liberty movement. It's about leadership. And there's just not a lot of people. It's easy to get up and rant and rave and yell and scream about it. But there's something about leading from the front and talking about the right ideas and casting confidence. Like, listen, I'm not new to having people throw barbs my way. And one of the common barbs, oh man, you're Pollyanna. You're ignoring the reality of the situation. Like, yeah, you might say that, or you might say I'm casting a vision of what's possible, and it's about building community around that idea. Because the average human being will not join this idea of the sky is falling and we're about to lose everything. The average human being will not jump on board. You'll get some people to, but the average human being is looking for hope. And this is about leading and casting the vision that better days are coming, but we got to get down to brass tacks. Like, there's hard work to be done, and it's educating people in that process. And that's what I love about meeting with you guys. So Kathy, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you so much for having me involved, and looking forward to next week.
Thank you, Shane. We're excited to have you here tonight, teaching and sharing with us, and we will see you next week. We are going to close up here with a word of prayer, like we like to open. Is there anybody who wants to volunteer that they'll say a closing prayer for us? I was looking for hands. Roxy, would you like to close us out with prayer?
Who did you ask?
I said Roxy.
Oh, yes, I would love to.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Our dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this opportunity to be able to meet with so many people in so many different areas and be able to discuss topics that really need to be taught. We are so grateful for Shane and for all that he gives us. We ask that we may continue in safety and peace throughout this night. And these things we ask and thank you for humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rox. I knew you told me you would, so that's why.
That's my calling. That's my calling.
I know.
Hey,
Awesome.
did you see that text I sent you? It's referring to Texas and the Patriot cell phone, and they're saying that and I don't know who passed it, but they passed it under your noses. That they're going to take, I don't know how this, but anyway, the cell phone anybody uses Patriot is going to go up. They're taking the money they lost out of yours, and it's going to go up 40% or something like that. But anyway, I sent you that thing, and you can post it or not, or
I'll have to check it out. Yeah, and if it's something for people's rights, I'll send it out too.
yeah, they're doing it under the nose, where you can't see it.
And if people had a little bit more time now, I want to kind of, this discussion was a little bit more challenging for me tonight because I didn't quickly grasp the difference between the two different ways to propose the amendments. So I kind of wanted a lot of you, Joe and Brandon, you were contributing a lot to the discussion. Maybe clarify that up a little bit better for us. To me, it seemed like they were talking about our state legislator would have to, I'm gonna open my book up where I was looking at it again. The state legislature would have to propose this, what is it, 3/4 or a certain percentage of state legislators, or the people we send to Washington would have to propose. Are those the two different ways they were saying we could do an amendment?
Joe probably knows better than I do. I was very, yeah. Shane was asking me questions. I have how I know how I feel about it, but I don't know a lot about the ins and outs, to tell you the truth.
Well, this to me was the first one. I should have stopped him and said, okay, educate me better, because I'm not quite getting it.
Yeah, Joe sounds like he knows his stuff.
Is that
I like
what it
listening
was?
to him.
Is that what it was?
Joe,
I'm sorry, what was the question? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Okay, so we were talking about the process for amending the Constitution, and there was two different ways. And one of them, it sounded like, was that at the local state level, our state legislatures would propose these amendments, and if enough state legislators propose it, then it can become an amendment. And the other one was the elected officials that go to Washington. They would propose. Are those the two different ways? Am I understanding that correctly or not?
So, yes, you're correct in that. So the amendments process that we've seen before has been initiated at the federal level. Most everything has. It's been through the federal process. It's been through the Congress and through the Senate that they've done all of these things, and they take them back to the states and get ratification at the state level. However, what we're talking about the Article 5 convention is where you decide whether to opt in or opt out of an Article 5 convention. At the state level, you can decide, first of all, whether or not you want to support an Article 5. And if they don't get the 38 states that Shane was talking about, you won't have one. But if you get, if first of all, you have to agree that you're going to support an Article 5 convention, and then you have the option of as a state legislature putting things on the table that you would like to see come before that convention. That's my understanding. And I'm sure.
It sounds kind of true to me, most of what you said, but and Kathy, I'll just add, I'm just pulling this from the internet. Like, again, it's what is this from? Constitution annotated. Either way, yeah, it does say that the application of the legislator of 2/3 of the several states, yes, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. Yep. When ratified, so it says when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. Like some of this stuff, I don't even know. It sounds like it's either 2/3 or 3/4.
It's 2/3. You have to have 2/3 to
Okay.
Actually call. You have to have the 38 states. Isn't that 2/3?
Yes.
Somebody do the math for me.
Well, let's see. Let me think. That would be 19. 19 by 2 is 38. Plus another 19 is, well, that's not quite 2/3. Wait. Oh, I hate math.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, that's what you have to call an Article 5 convention. And then when to ratify, I think that's where the 3/4 comes in. To ratify everything, you've got to have 3/4. Once you've had the convention, once you've had the amendments, then it has to be brought back to be ratified after that. It can't be ratified at the convention. It has to be brought back to the states.
I'm guessing you probably need 38 to ratify, because 1, 2, 3. No, maybe not. Yeah, all this math is too hard, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. Shane probably said it, honestly.
It would be like, okay, so what's 3/4 of 50? You've got 12.5 times 4. Oh, I mean 12. It would be, I'm sorry, it'd be
about
15
12 by 4. Yeah.
45. It'd be 45 to get. Be 45, right? To get 3/4.
No, 12 by 4 is 48. So take 12 off of that, it'd be about 36. Add a little bit more because we're off. So maybe it really is 30. Maybe 38 really is 3/4.
Yeah, 37 and a half is 3/4.
Yes.
No, 37 and a half is 3/4. That's correct.
So that's the 3/4. That's where the 38 comes from. I think that's the 3/4. So what?
Right.
2/3 is what then? 33. It's going to be a little bit less.
Right.
Anyway, Kathy, we're probably confusing the hell out of you, but hopefully
No,
that makes
No, that's really helpful. Years ago, when I lived in Arizona, I did a lot of political referendums. And one of the things I worked was to recall Arizona's yes vote to hold the Constitutional Convention. Evidently, and I didn't understand this process then at all, but evidently of the Arizona state legislature, Arizona had voted yes, that we needed to hold a constitutional convention. My own personal feeling about a constitutional convention is a lot like what Lee mentioned today. I don't believe there are enough politicians that I would trust to open up a constitutional convention. They can do anything they want with the Constitution. And I don't trust those at all. I think I could count on the fingers of one hand the people I feel absolutely are solid that I could rely on. A few Ron Pauls, maybe a Rand Paul. I mean, there's just almost nobody that I would want to put in charge of the liberty of America, Yeah. And so I would be totally, and so I voted to recall that vote. So there is some voting going on to hold the Constitutional Convention.
Joe, did you just say you don't agree?
Me? No, I say I do agree with her.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do too, I think.
I totally agree with her. That's what I said. I totally agree because, I mean, I can argue both sides of it. I can argue that let's give it a shot. I'm not against giving it a shot. I'm not against, but as long as I can walk away. As long as I can walk away and be free and independent. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
I think I honestly believe that I don't believe in individuals, and I don't believe in groups of individuals being bound by what a majority does. I don't believe in that. I believe you have the right, innate, inherent right to opt out, to walk away. And if that's recognized going into the convention, then we're good. At the same time, as Kathy said, I don't trust. There's an inherent affinity in mankind for collectivism, and if you look at the things that have been passed in all the recent years, the last 100 years, there's so many things that just, if you really put the test of liberty to it, they don't add up.
It all fails.
You can look on a local basis where we've got everybody knows that in Texas we have fairly significant property taxes. For example, 2 years ago they passed a state law amendment to the Constitution, essentially freeing all first responders or widows and of first responders or widows or widowers of first responders. Your husband or your wife dies in a first response situation. Well, you never have to pay property taxes again. And that they passed it. Why did they pass it? Because it feels good. But does it make sense? Nobody should have to pay property tax.
Not at all. That's not equality in my eyes. Yeah, that's like, why?
It's not a qualifier. It feels good, but nobody should have to pay property taxes.
I agree.
Nobody. So you start looking at all these things that feel good, and as Kathy was implying, I don't trust the majority. I don't trust the majority of the people that would be sent to these things because I know what people think. The majority of the people think that government should. The more people you get in one place, the more are going to think that government needs to do things for them. And whether it's to outlaw drugs, or whether it's to make plenty, basically take your money away from you to provide everything that certain classes of people want to enjoy. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
I agree.
Yet it feels good, so they'll go down that path, and that scares me.
Yeah, it feels good to them, probably because they're not educated. Go ahead, Kathy.
Well, we've been sold the bill of goods for many years. Way before any of us were born, they were using that catchphrase, democracy in this poetic way that makes it sound so genuinely good and wonderful. And instead of saying, we're going to vote who wants to shave his head, that's democracy. You've got 5 boys out playing marbles. Let's vote who gets that marble. And you know what I mean? That's democracy. But yet they make it sound like something totally different that it's not. It's really mob rule, like has been mentioned here tonight. There's nothing noble or good about democracy. But we've been fed that lie our entire lives, and people have lost the ability or never been given the tools to evaluate.
It's
and
a
that's
fraud.
what this is about, is acquiring and sharing those tools.
It's a fraud, Kathy. You're implying it's a fraud, and it is a fraud. Democracy is not what we wanted.
I think one more thing that I was thinking about, I didn't mention it when Shane was talking, but I want to say it was someone, maybe it was like someone that was elected in Virginia or something. But they're like, one of their platforms is like they were like very much anti-gun control or pro-gun. And what was the recent bill that's what was it, Congress that passed about like the assault weapons and like how they changed a whole bunch of crap about the definitions of assault weapons like a month ago. And like, so people voted in this, I want to say it was a senator, but I might have it wrong, but in Virginia, and like the whole platform was, yeah, pro-gun, I'm not gonna go and do anything against your guns. And then this lady's name was on the bill for all this. Oh, here's what a new assault weapon is. We're going to take more guns away from you. Her name was on the bill, and I know people from Virginia who are like pissed about this. That it's like, what? It's like this person's a Republican who was supposedly pro-gun, and here they are signing the anti-gun bills. Unbelievable. And that's how I feel about the Convention of States thing. Is like, I'm not sure if these people are swayed by money or peer pressure or death threats. I don't know what it is. There's going to be shenanigans with like media and I guess just society in general, where you're going to have these people who go to this Convention of States and they're going to be pressured to do certain things in certain ways. And it certainly won't be because of the people they represent, rather how they can just get the best for themselves.
Thank you, Brandon. I mean, we've got this senator here in Texas. His name is Cornyn, and he is a Republican thrice over. I mean, this guy is steeped in the blood of the Republican, whatever, red. And he goes up there and he votes for the red flag laws. He votes for that bill.
Yes, that's what it is. Red flag laws. Yep.
It's called authoritarianism. This guy, I don't care what side he's on, right or left, he's an authoritarian. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what's wrong with this whole situation. And there's so much illegitimacy in it there's a basic principle that I go by this, and it's like, if you engage in criminal activity, how much authority do you actually have? How much authority can you have in terms of managing, whatever? I mean, can you be a criminal and still have the authority of a representative representing the people? Can you be a criminal? In my mind, once you engage in criminal activity, that delegitimizes any authority that anybody might have extended to you. It's kind of like if you have an agent that works for you and you have a contract with this agent, and this agent, you give him the authority that you have to help you defend your property. Well, he goes out and engages in crime and takes advantage of other people out there. Does that not nullify the contract that you have with him? If he's engaging in your name and committing crimes in your name, how good is the contract that you have with him? We'll call it a charter. We'll call it a constitution. Yep. But if you have an agreement with this guy and he's your employee and he's doing things in your name criminally, things that you would not allow him to do, does that not negate his contract to begin with? And that's what I'm looking at here, because when you have these people engaging in things that are definitely unlawful, completely against natural law, have they not engaged in crime? And if they've not engaged in crime, are they delegitimized? Are they illegitimate now? Do they actually have any lawful or legitimate authority? My belief is no.
Well, Joe, if you allow that to continue, though, then you basically sort of like giving him power of attorney. And then now you're accountable for his behavior instead of him being accountable for his behavior.
I understand what you're saying, and that is a very strong argument. Yeah. But the point is, can you actually give somebody the authority to do something if you don't have it yourself? So if you actually have, if you have an employee and you contract with him to go out and transport your property from this place to that place, and he goes out and he starts robbing people, does he have the authority just because you haven't stopped him? You have a responsibility to stop him, right? You do have a responsibility to stop him in his tracks and say, you don't have the authority to do that, and I'm stopping you right here now. But if you don't stop him, or you're not effective in stopping him, does he really have the authority to do that? And my argument would be no. He's still a criminal.
He's still a criminal, but now you are also a criminal because you allowed him, you gave him your power of attorney. So now you have engaged, you've become a criminal with him.
Yeah, so am I not responsible for the things that he does and engages in? I am definitely accountable to a degree. I'm definitely accountable. So it's upon me to stop him, is it not?
Yep. And this is the situation going on in America today, is that we are letting our government go amok.
Indeed, we are. We've been letting them go down this path for a long time. Yeah. And it's been step by step over a period. And I'll argue it's been since the actual ratification itself, because if you look at the the Aliens and Sedition Acts, those acts, those two bills were essentially unlawful. They were, and that's why the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were enacted. That's why Thomas Jefferson and James Madison wrote those two almost identical resolutions to their states to essentially say, you not only have the authority, but you have the obligation to nullify laws that are coming out of Congress, laws that are coming out of Washington that are unlawful. And that it started way, way, way back then. And what have we done since? We've just let them continue. They haven't been abated. That has not been abated. It has not been controlled. And as a result, what have we got now? Can you even correct it?
We have people that fear the government instead of government that fears the people.
Yes,
right?
sir.
It's like it's the employee that fears the employer instead of the employer that fears the employee. Something like that.
Yes,
I
sir.
may have mixed it up. You get where I'm going. It's tyranny
exactly
instead of
right.
liberty.
Because everybody's afraid of being a January 6th victim.
And I think it comes back to the supremacy of the individual. If as Jefferson said, that authority comes from the people. Well, if the authority comes from the people, does it come from this is a basic question. Does it come from the individual or does it come from the people as a collective? Does it come from the people as a mass? Think about that, because do 2 people or 10 people have more authority than does 1 person?
They should not in a republic, I would say.
Bingo.
No, they
But in a
don't.
democracy, they would, of course, because that's
Exactly.
mob rule.
Exactly.
Not more authority, but more power, perhaps, to enforce authority.
So that implies that a democracy is based on a faulty premise. If you, and we could talk at length about this, but my argument is that authority is not cumulative, that everybody is born with and inherited and
This is equality, right? That one man should have any right as a million men, right? Yeah.
Yes.
But that's how I see a republic as being founded on. Is yeah, exactly. It's like I may have a million guns, and if every single other person in America said, or at least in a republic said, we don't want Brandon having all those guns, doesn't matter. Republic
Doesn't
says
matter.
I can have my guns.
That's right. That's exactly what a republic is like. That's exactly what. And my argument is if 10 people have more authority than 1 person, where'd they get it from? You can't stack authority on top of authority. It just doesn't happen. And you're born with your authority because your authority actually comes from your rights, because you have 4 rights. You have the right to life. You have the right to property, which is basically an extension of your life that you've gained honestly. And you have the right to a free exercise of conscience, to operate, to work with other people, to associate. Not all of that comes under the same heading of free exercise of conscience, to have a business and to work with people and to be fruitful and to multiply what you have and to your property. So you have life, property, free exercise of conscience, and you have one more, the right to defend those 3 with absolute force in defense, not in offense, but in defense. You have the absolute to use force to defend those first 3 things. And it's pretty much, you were born with that. And
Is that basically life, liberty, pursuit of happiness in a nutshell, though, right? Yeah.
Yeah, liberty and property. Yep.
Okay.
Liberty and property. And you have a right to defend those things. And if anybody else is going to defend them, you have to, if anybody's going to defend your 4 rights, then you've got to extend the authority to them to do that, whether that is your agent, government, or whether that's your neighbor. Your neighbor can do the same thing. You can join together. In my mind, that's government. Some people tell me that that's not government, but in my mind, that is the only lawful definition of government.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder what, like if I could, if I had a magic lamp and I could wish the founding fathers to come alive again and see America as it is today. Wonder what they would want to do to it, because I do, when I sit here and think like, oh, everyone, people have to defend liberty, kind of how I see it, where it's like, oh man, I see something bad happen to my neighbor, it's like, that isn't liberty. It's like, I better go jump on his side and, get these a-holes off of him then, kind of thing, to be like, if I see liberty being infringed, I need to step up and defend it.
I agree. At the same time, you have to be careful with that, because I kind of presented something a week or 2 ago when I said, so if you hear your neighbor, and this is an illustration I use, if you hear noise coming from your neighbor's house and you're not sure what it is, maybe he's beating his child, or maybe he's beating his wife, or maybe they're just in the throes of ecstasy, and you go running in his front door and he shoots you, who's in the wrong? You're dead. You're dead. He shot you crossing you bust open his door, you cross his threshold, and he shoots you. Well, I'm sure he would be unhappy that he shot you, but at the same time, you're still dead. And who's right and who's wrong? The fact of the matter, he's right, because he was defending his castle. defending, his life and his property and so forth. So if you can't do that, can you actually extend the authority of government to do that? And that's a really tough question that you start thinking about that. And can you extend the authority to your police to go busting into somebody's house when they think something is wrong?
This is why Shane calls it dangerous liberty.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, ma'am. I
said
agree
that
with
too.
And I do
say
prefer
liberty is
dangerous
dangerous.
liberty over safe bondage,
Yes.
And so,
Yes, ma'am. I love this. I just want you guys to know that aside from my children and my wife, I love my liberty friends the most. There's nothing more of a kinship than people who strive for liberty.
Yeah, I agree.
ah,
Thank you. I always love listening to you talk, Joe. I feel like you have a lot of insight.
No,
Between
I
you and
think
Shane, I learned a ton. It's
I think
wonderful.
you excel, man. You excel at bringing things to point. You've got a really good head on your shoulders.
I question. That's all. I don't know a lot. I don't have answers, but I question and I try and remember. Who was the other fellow? Who's the bald-headed kid that he looks like he may only have a few years on me? I forget his name, but he's gone. I think. The one
I
that
don't know.
the other one that Shane was talking to.
Lee's not bald headed.
Oh wait, who was it? Lee. Wait, Lee. That's his name. Oh, he looks like he was bald. I'm
today.
sorry.
Lee was on today.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
on today, yeah.
Yeah, Lee. Wait, he's not bald. Then I must be blind. So forgive
Oh,
me.
you're
I'm blind.
talking about the other. You're talking about the other fella that was on last week.
No, the kid that was on there today, talking to
Oh,
Shane.
okay, that was
He
Lee. That was
looks like
Lee.
he might have like 5-10 years on me. Okay, Lee.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, he seems like he's pretty smart too. Like when Shane asks you guys questions, you guys have answers. I honestly don't. I just have opinions and I don't, whatever.
I think
I
we're
just
all
wanna
in a
say-
different journey of learning and
Of
gaining
course.
knowledge and stuff here, so.
Definitely. Yeah,
I've been studying this since I was a teenager. I literally, when I was a kid, I was thinking about this, and there's just so many things that didn't add up to me back then. And it is a long journey. And I'm 63 now, and I will tell you that the last 11 years have been basically I've gone from libertarian to anarchist in this manner since. Yeah, and anarchy. Well, I mean that's not a pure thing, but
constitutional anarchist.
well, I'm an anarchist who actually believes philosophically in government.
Yeah.
I believe that philosophically that the definition of government is purely an agent, somebody who represents you and your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor, who can represent them but yet cannot exceed their authority. Does that make sense? So the only authority that they have is authority that you cede to them, and you can't cede them something that you do not possess. And so if you could keep government within the confines of that definition, I believe in government. But when you can't, it becomes unlawful.
Right.
So Joe, as listening to you talk, I thought at times a kind of a government that you could individually opt out would be good. Wouldn't it be interesting if we had a country with 4 different styles of government and you got to kind of enroll in this one, almost like people have health plans now. I'm going to enroll in this.
I agree.
So instead of having one all-powerful thing sweeping over a whole nation and you have to be enslaved to it.
I love that idea. And
You
Ron Paul spoke about states being able to do different things and create their own economies, their own markets, their own currency, and basically allowing people to vote with their feet, quote unquote, is what he said. Vote with your feet. Go to the place that most closely. And he was talking about in geographics, and I think
Yes.
as you're saying, Kathy, it doesn't have to be geographics, but I think it works better when you're talking about geographics. I can't get my mind around being able to opt out on an individual basis wherever you are. I would love for that to be, but they've got to recognize this. They basically you have to be able to stand up and say, I opt out. I declare my independence. I am not part of this anymore. I will assume the responsibility for myself economically and of all the infrastructure, whatever I have to have. You do not have to provide this to me, but you have to have them reciprocate and say, we recognize that, or they pull out their muskets and shoot at you, which is what happened in 1775. So,
could I add something?
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, Joe, I'm right there with you, 100%. I know but Brandon, Kathy, do you guys know the definition of anarchy? The true definition?
No, I don't.
No rules, no ruler,
No. Is it? Yes, without government.
no ruler. That's what it
Yeah,
means.
nobody controlling you, nobody telling you where you can go, what you can do, if you need a license for this or that. And
Right.
we need to get back to that. And I like Kathy's idea. Wouldn't it be funny if we could just let all the people that want to have everybody take care of them live in this area, and then we live here and we take care of ourselves. Anyway, that's all I had to add.
Thank you, because that is a definition of anarchy. Is basically no ruler, nobody who has authority over you. You have authority over yourself. You can cooperatively work with people around you, your neighbor, et cetera, but you don't have any authority over them. They don't have any authority over you. That's anarchy.
Huh.
They've turned it into something that's bad. Anarchy what they want to sell the public in the schools is, it's everybody cutting everybody's heads off in the street. And that's not really the case. It's kind of like a conspiracy theorist now is like a crazy person, where we're all conspiracy theorists right now because we're going against what they want us to think about. So
you know who started that, right? You know who started the quote unquote, and it happens in a lot of with a lot of words, okay? But who started calling themselves anarchists were communists. They were actually Marxists back in the early 1900s, 1920, 1930. Back then, the people who called themselves anarchists were actually Marxists. And
correct. To defame the name and to misrepresent what it is.
And we can bring up a long list of words that have also been co-opted like that, like liberal. Thomas Jefferson was a liberal, the true definition of a liberal: liberty, liberalism, small government, live and let live, non-intervention. That is liberalism. But the collectivists co-opted that word, and they call themselves liberals, and they're nowhere near liberals because they're some of the strongest authoritarians out there. So
they now say anarchy is mob rule when we really know mob rule is democracy.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Tyranny of the majority.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitions have changed. Yeah. What's what Charles just put. That's what I was just thinking too. I hear the stories about how they're changing the definitions of pretty much every word right now. I find it insane.
Yep. It is. It's scary because if you change your words, if you change your language, what do you have to count on? And in reality, it goes back to the Constitution. I like that word that we use, regulate. When you regulate is used in the Second Amendment. Regulate is used in the Commerce Clause, and their definition of regulate back then was virtually the opposite. When we say regulate, we mean having authority over something and managing something, where they actually meant just about the opposite. They mean keeping government out of it. They mean allowing the people to regulate it. In other words, to support it and to expand it and to foster it and to make it flourish. Whereas nowadays, when we say regulate, we interpret that as meaning authority over something. And in many cases, that authority just simply does not exist.
True.
Oh my gosh. That's kind of why I'm like, man, I have no idea. Like, I have no idea if this convention of states thing, like, does it even help? Like, why? Yeah, it'll help for a short time. That if we change the language to say, yeah, we'll cross regulate out and put whatever words you want there. What if 50 years down the road they bastardize that word to mean the opposite of what we meant for it to mean? Or like, yeah, again, Supreme Court interprets it to mean the opposite of what we would want it to mean, 50 years previous, you know what I mean? Or 100 years, after some time frame.
Brandon, think about this. So we all get to, our representatives, get to an Article 5 convention, and it is exactly what we expect it to be, which is a crap show, right? You get there and it's just it's a mess. And one thing that's possibly good is that it makes us all realize that things have to change. We don't want to be part of, a huge mass like this. I mean, the whole idea of a nation was not even originally part of the mentality of those men. Those men that got together in Philadelphia, they weren't there to create a nation. They were there to create a republic. And a republic is representative of numerous nations, quote unquote. And if you look at the definition of nation state, they were synonymous. Nation state, in fact, they were used together many times. They were called nation states, but nation then meant, if you had a state, that was a nation. They were
sovereign.
Sovereign. They were sovereign.
Yep.
And where did they get their sovereignty from? They got it from their citizens.
Yep.
So we have the Republic of Texas because we knew we were a separate individual nation.
That's right. And so how can you how can 13 colonies that become states, and by virtue of the authority vested in them by the individuals in their states, they send somebody to Philadelphia to talk about the Articles of Confederation, then come away with a Constitution, and then people over a period of 100 years or 150, 170 years actually, come away with the idea that that's a supreme entity. How can that be when the supremacy is actually in the individual? So the individual, it gives the authority, it goes to the state goes to the federal government. How in the world can we ever extrapolate the idea that the federal government would be superior to the states, or even worse, superior to the individual? It's counterintuitive.
Do you think that came out of after the Civil War, where Abraham Lincoln basically became indebted to world bankers? And that came out of that.
I absolutely do, because there's so many things about the period previous to the Civil War, which really was an age of a man. It was 70 years roughly, right? 72 years. And then 72 years later, do you know, for example, the flag? They never even flew the flag previous to the Civil War. It was virtually unheard of. It was a flag that Betsy Ross put together, and they used it in the Revolution, and they used it a little bit in the War of 1812. But other than that, it was not something that people saluted. It's definitely not something that they pledged allegiance to. And you look at that period of time, and people were independent in their thinking. People were and the states were independent in their operations. And come along Mr. Lincoln's war, and when he talked about nation in the Gettysburg Address, it was not the nation that preceded him. That nation that he declared was from that point on. It was a centralized oligarchy, frankly. There was so much. And you start looking at what they were doing in the name of federal government from just the taxation side. It was horrific. They were essentially waging economic warfare, one section of the country against another section of the country, of the various states.
Yeah, so Lincoln did a number of insane things, I hear. And like stopping like the printing press and stuff too, right? Wasn't that all part of it? Like you did? I can't even remember, but I remember looking it up over the course of like a week, some time back, and I was just like, this dude was like, I jokingly called him Adolf Lincoln, but
right. Yeah.
I was like, this dude is not nearly the figure I thought he was when I was taught in school and everything.
There's a book called The Real Lincoln, and I highly recommend it. There's actually 3 of them by the same author, by a guy by the name of Tom DiLorenzo. And he goes into much detail as to what Lincoln did during that war and what happened after the war, and essentially how things absolutely changed. But previous to the war, look at the things that happened in those 72 years. You start looking at Henry Clay's American System. You start looking at how you had states who were basically industrial, and you had states that were basically agricultural, and they started passing laws to subjugate the agricultural states. I don't know if you know this or not, but the cotton tax, for example, and the cotton taxes were exorbitant. And essentially, if you were to sell your cotton to England and the textile mills in England, it got to be as much as a 50% excise tax. It started out at like a 30% excise tax, but it wound up being a 50% excise tax. But if you sold it to the textile mills, in Massachusetts and in the New England states, then you didn't have that excise tax on there. But Great Britain, those textile mills, they were willing to pay more for the cotton. So what's wrong with free trade? So they started the protectionist measures and so who's really under whose boot heel in that situation? You start looking at, how can you use government to disadvantage, to subjugate one part of the country to another part of the country, or to one industry, agricultural, to another industry? How can you do that? There's no lawful authority in that whatsoever.
Very
and you start look at that history, but Henry Clay was the godfather of Abraham Lincoln. And if you look and study mercantilism, the American system, which was pure mercantilism, and Great Britain was deeply involved in mercantilism, it's essentially fascism light. It is the marriage between government and large corporations, whether they're railroad corporations, textile mills, or whatever. It is a marriage between government and large corporations, and it started way back then.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I jokingly call it a corporate, where I call us, the U.S. as it is today, a corporatocracy. The corporations run the government. It's sad. I mean, I laugh and say that, but it's sad.
No, it's true. It's absolutely true. It's oligarchy. That's what oligarchy is. When government is incestuously, basically intertwined with the largest. And if you look at the tendency is that you look at the laws, the way they're set up, and you look at legislation, the way it's set up, and it is actually set up to prefer super large corporations. Everybody says, well, these large corporations are greedy. Well, the large corporations wouldn't be where they were if it went for government, because the government has preferred them. The government has preferred large banking. The government has preferred the military industrial complex. The government has preferred large insurance companies like AIG, et cetera, large banks. The government has preferred oil industry. Government has preferred. You start looking at all the industries that government prefers, and then you start looking at who's on the other side of it. I will tell you that entrepreneurs are the backbone of free market operations. And then you look at licensing. What kind of company out there can operate without some sort of regulation or licensing?
Or, all the license regulations is bullshit.
And if you look at where it's going, the fact is they're eliminating the smaller businesses. They're eliminating entrepreneurs. They're eliminating family corporations. They're eliminating small corporations in favor of the large corporations. That is fascism.
Wow.
And that's like when Jeremy's comment in the chat. Ask Greg Abbott who is essential and who wasn't a year ago during COVID. That whole thing was just to shut down a ton of businesses in this country. Look at how many businesses, how many economies collapsed, and yet, Amazon gets bigger, Walmart, all the great big corporations, the government's totally helping them.
Yes. I remember seeing the videos. Yeah, they shut down like the little mom and pop shops. So there's like 2 employees. And yet, why is Walmart open with like thousands of people walking in and out daily? Nothing makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, I love Walmart. My wife worked there for 17 years as a vendor. And it's, I champion free market operations. I champion big businesses as long as they're not preferred, as long as they're not advantage versus special treatment. Exactly. You look at the tax benefits that they get. You look, if you just look at what's pharmaceutical industry, that's what I've been into the last 35 years. I've been involved in, you can call it healthcare finance, medical care finance, insurance. It's not insurance anymore. It hasn't been for 30 years. I've been doing that for 35 years. And if you look at the problems that we have in the medical industry, when you look at hospitals and doctors and the costs going up, you can trace all the problems back to one thing, and that was 1965. And I could go into the details on it, but you can trace all the problems we have in our medical industry back to 1965 and Medicare and passage of Medicaid Acts, because it basically set up a situation where the government became by de facto the ruler over what was happening in medical care. And you start looking at, we had one of the most efficient and one of the most cost-effective medical systems in 1965 than as anybody in the entire world. And yet what government's done, and I could peel back the onion for you and go into that, I won't right now, but the black hole of it all is the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry, aided and abetted by the FDA, protected by the FDA, is able to, through insurance policies and through its plans, carriers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, Cigna, they are a means or a medium to fleece America for the pharmaceutical industries. The rebates, are you familiar with the rebates that happen? For example, pharmaceutical industries pay rebates to pharmacy benefit managers. Pharmacy benefit managers are the ones that manage your card. You go to Walmart or Walgreens and plop down your card. The pharmacy benefit manager is the one behind the scenes. Your pharmacist gets on his computer and sees what's available to you, and it's the pharmacy benefit manager that created what they're linking up to, the database, et cetera. The pharmacy benefit manager receives rebates from the pharmaceutical manufacturer, and those rebates are huge. They can be as much as 60-70% of the actual cost of the drug. And we're talking about the high dollar drugs, the expensive drugs. In reality, now, so I'll give you just one example. Humalog. Everybody knows what Humalog is. It's an insulin, right? And everybody's been crying about the price of insulin going up about 7 years ago because they could. And the reason why is because there's a monopoly on it. There's a monopoly on it because of the FDA and the federal government. Well, they took the price of insulin, which was around $100 to $125 a month, and now it's $700 to $800 a month, depending on where you buy it. $700 to $800 a month. Now, the same manufacturer that makes Humalog actually came out with what's called an authorized generic. An authorized generic is the exact same formula. It is the exact same substance, and it is manufactured by the exact same company. The only difference is a packaging. Now, there's a lot of variations in generics out there, but an authorized generic is the exact same thing. Just picture a conveyor belt coming off. One goes this way and gets a Humalog package. One goes off this way and gets the generic package. If you go to your pharmacy and you've got a plan that always prefers generics, right? Everybody does. When you go to the pharmacy and you say, and you find out that there's a generic for Humalog, and the fact is it's only about $125 to $150, and you go and you ask for it. Well, the pharmacist goes behind the scenes, links up on his computer that links him to the PBM, and he says, I'm sorry, your plan doesn't cover that. It's not on, the technical term is it's not on the formulary. You can't get that drug. It's a generic, but you can't get it. Why can't you get it? Because that pharmacy benefit manager is preventing you from getting the generic drug, forcing your plan to pay the price of the $800 name brand drug, because the pharmacy benefit manager is getting a 50 to 60% rebate on that drug. And for example, if you're on a Blue Cross plan, your pharmacy benefit manager is Prime, Prime. Well, Prime is a PBM that is owned by Blue Cross Blue Shield. And that money is going into Blue Cross's pocket. All right. So Blue Cross is back there collecting money. And so now people like me, we've got to go and do a proposal. We've got to underwrite your medical plan. We try to give you a competitive proposal, give your employer a competitive proposal. We've got to underwrite that thing. Well, Blue Cross presents the claims, right? They have to give us a claim so it can be underwritten. Well, they say you've got $1 million in RX claims. The fact of the matter is they're not $1 million. There's only 700,000 because 30% of that went into Blue Cross's pocket.
Of course. Yeah.
And that's how America is being fleeced.
Yep. What do you think about the whole speaking of America being fleeced, what do you think about the whole new the IRS agents thing that at least that's what I just saw come out. They just added like tens of thousands of IRS agents or something?
Scares the hell out of me.
Oh yeah. I'm sitting here like, oh boy.
87,000.
Oh yeah, so you know the number. Yeah, I'm just like, this is insane. Like what you know they're not going to go and hunt on the rich, quote unquote, you know, who are dodging or maybe not dodging taxes, but it's like they don't need 87,000 unless they're trying to get the millions of Americans. Let's face it.
I'm scared. I'm self-employed. I'm scared to death. I'm scared to death. I'm looking to bug out. I'm looking to go someplace where I can grow my own food and, you know, and fight the fight. We want to fight the fight, right? But at the same time, you don't want to be an IRS target because they can absolutely ruin you. They scare me. Have you ever been audited?
No. I mean, I don't have a business or anything. I'm a simple guy. I work one job and I take care of a family.
I was 24 years old. I had I was more like 27. I had 5 kids and I got audited. They actually did what they called a field audit. They come out to your house and they go through everything. They go through your checkbook. They go through your deposits. They go through your egress. They go through, you know, all your checks that you've written. They go through absolutely everything. But the one of the worst crimes, the worst characteristics I can put on an IRS agent is they have no sense of humor, and they don't. No sense of humor whatsoever, and they are unforgiving. I didn't make very much money, and yet they still disallowed my, you know, they basically made me go back and pay several $1,000s. That was a lot of money to me back then. A lot of money back then. And it's like they are, and I think that's where we're headed right now, to a very punitive. It's been pretty lax over the last, 10, 15 years. It's really been pretty lax for self-employed people. But I think we're going back to a punitive IRS. And they scare me.
Oh, I bet. Well, it's so much easier too. I just feel like the average, if the IRS came to me and said, pay $300, you owe us $300. I'd be like, well, I don't understand freaking tax law. It's like, am I going to go pay some lawyer a couple $1,000 to fight that? No, it's not worth my time. So it's like, well, I guess I have to pay it, or I'll be, I'll have a gun to my head, or I'll be tossed in jail or whatever. So it's like, wonderful. I guess just fleece me.
You're going to pay your $300 and count yourself lucky.
That's it, which it doesn't feel lucky at all, but I have no other choice because, again, it's out of control.
the frustrating thing about it is income tax is not constitutional.
I agree.
Literally, not one of us should be paying any income
I
tax
agree.
whatsoever.
Indeed. The founders, that was really interesting. You can actually go and Google, you have to do a little digging because it's kind of old, but the founders, there's a thing out there called the founders tax plan. And the only thing that the founders could absolutely agree on was an excise tax. There was no other tax that they could absolutely agree on at all. They just, because property tax is taxing the fruits of your labor. Income tax is taxing the fruits of your labor. And there's a saying that I really, really like that is, if slavery is stealing 100% of the fruits of your labor, at what percentage is it not slavery?
Yeah.
It does. The authority to do that simply does not exist.
Yep. Like Warren Paul always said, taxation is death.
Yes, ma'am. And that's one of the great places we have to go. We, at some point, we have to get to the point that one of the things that we have to do is essentially refuse to pay them anymore. The problem with that is that only, as Ron Paul, I think he said it, but anyway, only about 45% of what the government operates on, or 45% of what they get, not what they operate on. They operate a whole lot higher than this, but only 45% of what they get in terms of taxes comes from income tax. There's so many other forms of taxes that they get. 55% comes from other types of taxes, corporate taxes, and a whole list of other types of taxes. And so I don't know, if we could choke off the income tax and say we're not going to do it and put them out of business, I'd say that's the first thing we ought to do. But I think we've got to resist. I think we've got to get to the point where we're just going to say we're not going to participate. We're not going to submit to this anymore. It's, I think you've got to resist. That's, I honestly, I don't think there is a legislative, well, maybe legislative of a legislature that doesn't currently exist, but
Yeah.
I don't think that what's in place right now has any promise of any future in it, because I don't think you can take a criminal entity and all of a sudden, I'll just say it this way. I don't think you can, I don't think liberty's ever been a product of a majority. It's never been a product of a democratic process. And I don't think it's going to be a product of a democratic process going forward. It's never been the product of the majority.
Yeah, it doesn't seem likely at this point to me either. But I mean,
I think
I'm pessimistic. But you may.
No, Brandon, it never was. It never was. You know what percentage of people actually participated in the War for Independence in 1776 through 82, whatever it was? Less than 20%.
Really? Wow.
Less than 20%. Most people just sat out and watched. Most people sat in the stadium, sat in the stands. And if you look at the people that actually participated in bringing things about, it was a very, very, very small minority. And it's never, ever, liberty has never been the product of a majority. It's not in the cards. So who's going to stand up first?
Yeah. What's the problem is how do you organize? I think it's what Shane was saying. It's like it probably shouldn't come to bullets and nukes and crap. But it's like, how do you organize when the IRS is as big as it is? At least I'm talking taxes specifically. When the IRS is as big as it is, and I actually just found out from this 80-some thousand agents they're hiring that some of them apparently walk around with guns. Like there are enforcement officers. I forget the name, but they're basically police officers that literally just work for the IRS. And so it's like, well, when you don't pay taxes, at some point they probably send these guys out, these guys who have guns and combat training. So it's like, well, one man can't really stand up to how large the IRS is, So it's like it really has to be a big resistance if it's going to work.
Has anybody ever heard of Peter Schiff? Peter Schiff is an economist. He's an economist, and he comments basically where we're headed in terms of the economy. He's been calling this bust since before 2008, since early 2000s.
Wow.
He called the 2008 bust, and he was right on. And he said, but you know what? The 2008 bust wasn't the bust that it should have been. He said they started quantitative easing and started blowing the balloon back up immediately, and they kept it from bursting entirely. And so he said it didn't go down the extent that it could have and should have gone down. And he said that only delays it. And when it finally hits, it's going to be horrific. But anyway, Peter's into that. And he basically says we should be buying precious metals. We should be buying gold and silver, and we should be hedging our bets and basically So largely getting out of currency, getting out of
fiat.
bank,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. But
If
his
only I
father,
had money and land and stuff that I could do anything with.
right? G. Edward Griffin says, get out of banks, put your money into things you can touch, things that whether it's gold and silver or real estate. He also says guns and ammunition as well. But Peter
Luckily, I
Schiff's
have some of
father,
that.
you might want to look up Peter Schiff's father. Peter Schiff's father his name was Irwin Schiff. And Irwin Schiff died in prison back, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. He died in prison. He was a tax activist, I guess you'd say. He wrote at least 1 or 2 or 3 books. And he was a resistor. He was very vocal, and essentially said that the federal government has no authority to do what they're doing, which is what we're saying here. But he made a big target of himself. He went to prison. He resisted. He said he encouraged people to resist. He went to prison. He was a political prisoner, and he got cancer, and he was in his 70s, and he's still in prison, and he died there.
Wow.
They wouldn't release him. He was not violent in any way, shape, or form, never hurt anybody, but he defied the IRS.
I have a cousin who went to jail for income tax evasion. He owned a business, like a produce stand. They literally walked in one day with their enforcement agent and just carted stuff off. Come in, grab his cash register, just wheeled everything out of his business, confiscated it, and then he ended up in jail for income tax evasion.
Wow.
I think that if people have the right knowledge, that they get away with not paying taxes. I think they're not supposed to, but the problem is most of us don't have that right knowledge.
No, we don't. I believe in getting away with as little as I possibly can. I mean, I don't believe that there's anything quote unquote patriotic about paying taxes whatsoever.
Right.
No, our tax laws are a jungle. I've looked at it, and not that I'm I'm not a legal, expert or anything, but my goodness, when I look at it, I'm just like, the common man could not make sense of this.
I don't believe you can steal from a thief.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I believe if somebody's robbing you, what is your lawful options? I think you have 2 options with a criminal. You can get away from them. You can flee. You can separate yourself from them, or you can resist them. You have 3 options. One, you can submit. You can submit and you can be the victim, or you can get away from them, or you can subdue them. Those are options.
Remove yourself, remove him, or let him rule you.
That's right. Those are your 3 options, and that's what it comes down to when it comes down to unlawful government as well, because there's nothing in terms of criminality. There's nothing inferior about a government that engages in criminal activity.
Yep, you got it, man. Jeremy, good night. Thanks for chatting. I probably should hop off myself.
Appreciate you guys.
Almost 10 p.m. for me. Nice chatting with y'all. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys.
Have a good night.
See you guys.
Next week, Wednesday, right?
See you next Wednesday. Yeah. Have a good night, everybody.
All right, good night.
Thanks for joining us, our new people, and we'll see you Wednesday.
Thank you, Kathy.